Hi. In the part two of this video, we will look at some more questions. These are uh, these questions may have multiple uh, answers, or most of them have single answers. Let's look at these questions. So, like I said in the part one of the video, that these are real exam questions. If you go through it and understand the reason behind the answers, your chances of clearing the exam or scoring high is pretty good. So please focus on the explanations given in these discussions, and that will provide more clarity as to how to identify the correct answers, even if you are in dilemma, how to explore uh, each option and then see which one sounds more correct. This question is on SaaS. So it's software as a service. The question says, when you are implementing a software as a service solution, you are responsible for configuring the high availability. So the answer for this, we have four options. Let's decode the options. No change is needed. Let's park it for now. Let's see the other three options. Define scalability rules. So if you have software as a service, it is automatically scalable. You need not define the scalability rules. Then install the SaaS solution. You do not install the SaaS solution because it is already given to you by Azure. uh, you can configure the SaaS solution. This is something which looks more likely. So when I compare A with D, D seems to be more correct. So we'll go with this option, and is this seems to be the right option. So as we see, D is the right option. Let's look at a question which is from a generic section. So for example, this one is: an organization that hosts its infrastructure in a private cloud can decommission its data centers. So the client has a data center, and the question says is, if we go on a private cloud, uh, can we decommission the data center? So no change is needed. I don't think so. If you go on a private cloud, so this answer here is C. In You have to go on the public cloud. The reason for this is uh, because even if you are using a private cloud, it is a combination of your data center and the private cloud. And if you're using a hybrid cloud, it's a combination of public cloud and a private cloud. If you're on a Hyper-V host, this is infrastructure as a service, hypervisors. This option is totally out of context here. So the correct option is C. This looks to be more correct. So this question is on cost. Okay. So, in the exam, you may get a full blown question like that. The first line and this paragraph is a repetition in many questions, but the main question is here. If I click here, so when planning to migrate a public website to Azure, you must plan to pay monthly usage costs. So let's look at the option. No change is needed. So I don't think you have to pay monthly only. You have uh, other mechanisms as well. Um, let's look at other options. So, uh, so option A as of now will park it, okay, because there can be multiple ways of paying it. It may not be only, uh, uh, I mean, pay as you go. Okay, so it says pay monthly usage cost. So uh, this can be one of the options because it's monthly payment. Now let's look at the other options. Deploy a VPN. This is not needed if you want to move a website to Azure. Uh, Deploy a VPN not necessarily needed from a cost perspective. Pay to transfer all the website data to Azure. Um, Mostly getting data in is free. Reduce the number of connections to the website. This is totally out of context. So the option for this should be no change is needed because you end up paying monthly usage cost in Azure. So this is the right answer. So let's look at this one. This is a PaaS related question. So the question goes is your company plans to migrate all of its data and resources to Azure. The company's migration plan states that only platform as a service solutions can be used in Azure. You need to deploy an Azure environment that supports the planned migration. So this is a solution they have given. You create a Azure app service and Azure virtual machines that have Microsoft Server installed. So uh, so let's look at what are the components they are giving the solution. So Azure app service. So this seems to be a PaaS compliance from a PaaS perspective. But the second one, the virtual machine, this is more relevant for a infrastructure as a service. For PaaS, this one is not relevant. That's why I don't think this will meet the goal. The answer should be no here. That's correct. Let's look at a question from Elasticity. So it says your company hosts an account named App1 that is used by all the customers of the company. App1 has uh, low usage during the first 3 weeks of each month and a very high usage during the last week of each month. So, which benefit of Azure Cloud Services supports cost management of this type of usage pattern? So, if you see the question here, this is the key here is this line, if which says that the app one has low usage during the first 3 weeks of each month and very high usage in the last week. So that means it needs some flexibility and elasticity. So this is not asking about high availability. If there is a question on high availability, then uh, there must be some words around uh, availability zones or multi-region deployments, etc. This cannot be high latency. High latency because this is totally out of context. High latency is out of context. Latency is like when you're trying to access a website, you should get the response in milliseconds, as as fast as possible. But here there is, if you see the question, there is no clue given about speed of access. Load balancing is also not correct because this is not related to load balancing. If you talk about load balancing, the way the question would be framed is it will have some virtual machines, 2 or 3 virtual machines, and there will be a traffic manager, Azure traffic manager, which will be used to route the traffic to these virtual machines. So hence, elasticity is the right answer for this. This is how you should go one option at a time and try to give a justification to yourself, and that way even if you're getting stuck, you can look for clues and answer it. So let's look at a generic one. So you have an on-premises network that contain 100 servers, okay, and you need to recommend a solution that provides additional resources to users. So please note this, it is asking to provide additional resources. It is not asking you to migrate the entire stuff to cloud. So hence it is not a case of a public cloud. It is asking that I still want to go with my data center, but there should be additional users, additional resources for usage. The solution should minimize capital and operational expenditure costs. What should you recommend? So if we ask about capital, so if you know, there are two kind of expenses, capex and opex. So it is asking you to minimize capex as well as opex. So if you want to minimize capex, you don't do anything with your on premises. You simply use a private cloud and extend your on premises network. Okay, so that will keep your capex low, and it will also keep your opex low, because uh, now for any additional stuff, your Azure, which is a shared environment, uh, it is coming into play. So it's a private cloud specifically made for you, but the costs and the cost of provisioning is very low. So hence, in this case, private cloud should be the right answer for this one. Yeah. So if public cloud cannot be the answer here, like I explained, that it is asking to you to add the resources. In public cloud, what happens is all the on-premises data and applications are moved to cloud totally. So hence A cannot be an answer. B cannot be an answer because additional data center, and this is a Azure exam, so chances are nobody would ask you a question where Azure is not put into play. So keeping that logic in mind, this cannot be an answer. And then hybrid cloud is a combination of public and private cloud. Uh, but it would not minimize your capital and OpEx expenditures. Uh, so C would be the right option for this one. Let's look at a question from Failover. On Failover, you will see multiple questions in the exam. So this question goes this way: you plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on the virtual machines are available if uh, the data center fails. So if you see this, this is a question about failure. Okay, if the data center is failing, and then the solution they are giving is you deploy the virtual machines to two or more scale sets. Does this meet your goal? So scale sets are like auto scaling groups in AWS. What it does is, depending upon your load on the virtual machine, it would create two or three more virtual machines if the load is pretty high. Now, scale sets will not help you in the failover. What helps you in the failover is AZ, availability zones. That is something which will help you during the failovers. So hence the answer for this should be no. Okay, so that's the right answer. So let's look at a question from the price section. So if you have 1,000 virtual machines hosted on a Hyper-V host in a data center, you plan to migrate all the virtual machines to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. You need to identify which expenditure model to use for the plan Azure solution. Which expenditure model should you identify? So in this case, what's happening is you already have 1,000 virtual machines, and it is in your data center, and you plan to migrate those virtual machines to Azure in a pay-as-you-go subscription. Okay, so and you want to identify the expenditure model. So the question doesn't talk about scalability here. Okay, scalability and elasticity is out of context here because there are no clues here which relates to elasticity and scalability. That leaves us with operational and capital because these are most likely the two um, expenditure models, OPEX and CAPEX. So let's focus on A and C now. Now, if we move the 1,000 virtual machines into Azure, what you're doing is you are reducing your CAPEX cost. Uh, you already had a data center and you had invested huge amount of money, so that was your CAPEX. So once you come into Azure, you are coming here because you just want to go ahead with the operational cost and reduce your capex significantly. In this case, I would propose operational, option A. This should be the right one, I think. Yeah, option A should be the right one. Yeah. Let's look at a question from AI. So your company plans to deploy AI solution in Azure. What should the company use to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics? So let's go by option by option. So in this case, if you see batch is for scheduling. Okay, so this is out of context here. It has nothing to do with AI. If you take Cosmos DB, this is a NoSQL database, has nothing to do with AI. So let's take these two out. C and D is out. Um, Now we have two more options as your logic apps. So the logic apps basically, if you want to build uh, a web app then that's the time you should use it. So I think A should also be out. So B looks to be a probable right answer. So so B is the right answer here, okay, because you will use machine learning studio. So whenever you talk about AI, you have ML studio. Now let's look at a question from permissions. So when you need to delegate permissions to several Azure virtual machines simultaneously, you must deploy Azure virtual machines to the same Azure region. Is that so? No. So since it should not, there is no restriction. You can have these on different regions as well, or different AZs, availability zones as well. So A cannot be the answer here. Now, second one is by using the same resource manager template. So, so resource manager template is, when you want to have a similar configuration for your virtual machines and you replicate those virtual machines in different AZs or in different region, that's the time you should use resource manager. This is not a use case for resource manager. Here you're talking about delegating permissions in one go simultaneously. So if you have to do it, resource group is the right option for this. AZ is not the right option because, like I explained, uh, even if you have in the same AZ, the permissions gets cascaded, not necessarily. Okay, but if you have a resource group and inside the group you have 4 or 5 resources, you give the permission at the resource group level. Resource group is the parent. So if you give the permission at the parent level, the permissions will get cascaded to each and every resources. So this C is the right answer. So right answer is C here. I hope the explanation is making sense. Now let's look at a question from database. So you plan to store 20 terabytes of data in Azure. The data will be accessed infrequently. So these are the keywords and visualized by Power BI. So the Power BI will be used for reporting. So what it says is you need to recommend a storage solution and you need to give two storage solutions. Okay. So you have a 20 terabytes of data and you have to put this into a database in Azure. Okay, and then plug Power BI. This data will be infrequently accessed. Okay, so if you have these options, let's look one by one. So data lake. Okay, since we need two options, data lake can be one probable option because the volume is pretty huge. 20 terabytes is pretty huge, and then you can plug Power BI to your data lake. This will mark it as of now. This can be one potential option. Cosmos DB is a NoSQL, and if you're talking about plugging a Power BI to a NoSQL database, it won't work. Uh, Keeping that in mind, uh, I would I would skip this. Okay, Azure SQL data warehouse. This looks to be a likely option because the data volume is huge, 20 terabytes, which is good enough for a data warehouse. And then you can plug Power BI to data warehouse as well. This also looks to be a likely option. So we have two options. Let's explore other two options. SQL database. SQL database, if you see the volume is relatively high, though you can plug Power BI to the SQL database, but uh, data warehouse and data lake will be far better options than a vanilla SQL database. And the last one is database for PostgreSQL. So, like I said, the data volumes are pretty high. If I have data lake and SQL data warehouse, I won't select these two. My options will be A and C. So this looks to be the right option. Now let's look at this question, which is a monitoring related question. Now you have a virtual machine named VM1 that runs on Windows. So this is key. You have a virtual machine which is running on Windows 2016 in the East US region. The question says which service should you use from the Azure portal to view the service failure notifications that can affect the availability of VM1. So you have a virtual machine on a Windows platform in the East US region, and you want to understand the service failure notifications. You want to view them. Okay. So if you see the options here, advisor is not an option because advisor gives you overall insight as to uh, what from a cost optimization perspective. So advisor, whenever you think of advisor, you think about advice on cost optimization. See, the virtual machines is not an option here because it will not send you notifications automatically. So there is a monitoring tool called Azure Monitor. This looks to be a right option here because the monitoring tool can monitor the status and send you the notifications. Service Fabric is different. Service Fabric is mostly linked to the microservice related components. So this is out of context. So for me, the right answer should be B, Azure Monitor. Yeah, this is the right answer. Now let's look at this option. So you have an Azure environment, okay, and you have 10 virtual networks inside that environment and 100 virtual machines. You need to limit the amount of inbound traffic to the virtual networks. What should you create? So in this case, NSG is not an option. What you do with NSG is you uh, tell which IPs can access on which ports. Okay, so this is not an option. Then it says is what should you create? If you create 10 virtual network gateways, um, if you already have 10 virtual networks, most likely you already have the gateways. 10 express route circuits. Um, I'm not sure on this. I don't think this is the option. Firewall, yes, because if you want to limit the inbound traffic, firewall is the ultimate choice. Okay, so I think if you want to limit, I would go with the firewall option. D looks to be the correct answer. Okay, let's look at this question. So you plan to map a network drive from several computers that run Windows 10 to Azure storage. So you have a list of network drives, and you want to map to the Azure storage. You need to create a storage solution in Azure for the planned map drive. What should you create? So the question says is, suppose you have a data center and you have a lot of network drives and everything is now connecting to Azure storage. So what would you use? So if you want to copy the files over from those network drives to the Azure storage, so what should you create? The files cannot be stored in a SQL database, so this definitely should not be the case. So A is out of question. B is a virtual machine data disk. So if you need a storage solution, why would you create a virtual machine first and then link that storage and then move the data to that storage? We would not do that. Okay, that will be very expensive. We would use a storage solution. Virtual machine is not a storage solution, it's a compute solution. The third one says a file service in a storage account. Yes, this looks to be a probable option, and blob service in a storage account, this also looks to be a probable option. Now between C and D, let's try to see which one is more apt here. So if you see, the question says the keyword Windows 10. Windows 10. When you say Windows 10, it's a SMB protocol. Whenever SMB protocol comes into play, it's always a file service. It's not a blob service. So that way, C looks to be the right option here. Okay, so C is the right option. Go with it. Now this question, so your company is planning to migrate all the network resources to Azure. You need to start the planning process by explaining Azure. What should you create first? So remaining two lines are just scrap. Okay, the first line, you should focus on the first line. Your company plans to migrate all its network resources to Azure. Okay, so if you're planning to move all the network resources to Azure, what's the first thing you would create? uh, if you see the management group, that's not the first thing you will create. Virtual network, not even that. First thing is you will first you have to subscribe. First you create a subscription and then the other things would come into play. So for me, the first option should be the right option. The subscription is the right option. Okay, so A should be the right option here. Now let's look at this question. So you have an on-premises application that sends email notifications automatically based on a rule, and you want to move this to an Azure platform, and you need to recommend a serverless computing solution for this application. What should you recommend? Okay. So when you see serverless, so even all of these are serverless, all of the options. So we cannot use serverless to pick the right one. So now what to do? So let's look for the other keyword. So it's saying it has to send email notifications automatically based on a rule. So if it's a based on a rule, uh, the logic app seems to be the right one because you know based on the logic, the app would send notifications based on the logic. So this sounds to be more apt compared to web apps or API app. The correct answer should be C. Let's look at this one. So you have an Azure web app. You need to manage the settings of the web app through your iPhone. Okay. So this is the keyword here. From an iPhone, you need to manage the settings. What are the two Azure management tools that you can use? So as you know, like if you want to connect to Azure, you can use CLI, Cloud Shell, PowerShell, etc. You can also use Azure portal. Okay. Now in this case, if you have an iPhone, you want to do it from your iPhone. Okay. So from your iPhone, if you see PowerShell will not work. PowerShell works on the Windows platform. So D is out of question and E is totally out of context here. So D and E are gone here. Okay. So now you have three options: CLI, Azure portal, and Cloud Shell. So if you're doing from an iPhone, uh, your Cloud Shell uh, is in the Mac OS platform. So Cloud Shell works fine. CLI works fine. Azure portal, I'm not pretty sure. This is not something which I'm very confident of. I'm more confident of CLI and Cloud Shell. Um, these two work very fine with iPhone. Let's look. Yeah, this should be right. So this is the question on the SLA. So what it says is you have Azure web app and it provides SLA of 99.95% and Azure SQL database which has an SLA of 99.99%. So what will be the composite SLA? So it says they are doing an average out which equals to 99.94%. So is this correct? If yes, put answer no change needed. If no, then select between B, C, and D. So if you select if you see B, the lowest SLA, I don't think that this will be a lowest SLA. This will not be highest SLA as well. This will be the SLA would be should be a mix of both. So I think this is the right option. 99.94% is the right option. Now let's look at a silly question. This is it's asking like Azure Germany can be used by legal residents of Germany. So obviously this cannot be right. So A cannot be the option. B, only enterprises that are registered in Germany. No, only enterprises that purchase their Azure licenses for partner in Germany. No. So D looks to be right, where any user or enterprise that requires its data to reside in Germany. Now, even I'm in India. From India, I can put my data in Germany if there is a need to do that. Uh, there are IT service companies in India, suppose in Bangalore, and from the offshore team, people would want to put their data in Germany to ensure that there is low latency for the German users, and that can be done. So D looks to be the more apt option for this one. So let's look at a simpler question. This one is very easy to guess. It says you which two types of customers are eligible to use Azure government. So both AWS and Azure, I'm pretty sure IBM Cloud as well as Google Cloud or Alibaba Cloud, they must be having this option. So for government clients, the government clients like the defense services, uh, CIA and etc. They had a need that we cannot store our data in the public cloud. So you have to build something which is very specific to the government sectors, and this is what Azure has done. So Azure government is for people who work in the government. So in this question, if you see, it is for which government? Canadian, European, or is for United States. Right now, this service is only available in the United States, and both the government entity and the contractor can use this. So the answer should be C and D for this one. This is pretty easy to guess as well. Okay. Let's look at this one. Your company plans to deploy several web servers and several database servers to Azure. You need to recommend Azure solution to limit the types of connections from your web servers to database. So basically what it's saying is you have few web servers, few database servers, and you have to limit the connections from your web servers to the database servers. What should you do? Because if you look at these options, route filter is not an option for this one. Um, Service bus is for messaging queue services middleware kind of thing. So this is not an option. NSG looks to be a right option here because you would limit the types of connections using uh, the IPs, provide access to those IPs and to specific ports, and using that you can do that. So NSG looks to be an option here. So let's look at one more question here. So your network contains an AAD forest. The forest contains 5,000 accounts. Your company plans to migrate all the network resources to Azure and to decommission the on-premises data center. You need to recommend a solution to minimize the impact on users after the planned migration. Basically, what's happening is your in-premises applications and data is moving to cloud, and so it's saying is you already had a set of active directory users there, and you want to migrate those as well. So how would you minimize the impact on the user base? So would you let's look at the options. The first one says use a MFA. MFA is used only for being doubly sure person who's getting in is correct. So it's a multi-factor authentication. This is not a use case for MFA. The second one says sync all the Active Directory user accounts to Azure Active Directory. This looks to be an option because in order to minimize the impact, whatever user base you have in your in-premises, you would want to sync that up with your Active Directory Azure. Okay, so this looks to be an option. Third one says instruct all users to change their password. Needless to do that. There is no use of doing that, and that will have the question says minimize the impact. This will not minimize the impact. This will maximize the impact. If you have like it says 5,000 users, you have a forest, AD forest. So 5,000 users changing their passwords, it's a big deal. It will not minimize the impact. This cannot be an option. D says create a guest user account for the AD for each user. How will it solve it? It will not solve the problem. You have to sync up. You already had the user base there. Creating a guest account will be of no use here. It's futile. The correct option looks to be B. One more simple question. This is for Key Vault. This is asking like if you want to store certificates. This is an easy one. Certificates, you should always use Key Vault for it. Okay. So that brings us to the end of part two. So do practice these questions. I hope the justifications make sense for you to understand why we are choosing one option over the other. Uh, this exam will have a combination of different types of questions. So in the part three, we will look at some more questions which are of different nature. Keep practicing. Uh, the key is how to decode each option. In the exam, you might face scenarios where few options might be new. So if you have the right technique and you have the skills, you would be able to decode it. Catch you later. And do remember that these are real exam questions from multiple gathered from multiple forums and multiple people. So uh, practicing this and having the logic identified is the key to pass the exam. Thank you for your time, and you can visit the part three of this session.